This is NHTV2, North Haven Government Television, a service of North Haven Community Television. The following program is brought to you through the support of the Town of North Haven.
Good evening. I'd like to call the Tuesday, March 19, 2024 North Haven Fire Commission meeting to order. I'd like everyone to please stand for the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you very much. I'd like to ask for the approval of the minutes of the Board of Fire Commission regular meeting held on February 20th, 2024. So, do I hear a second?
Second.
Any question on the motion? All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? So moved. The Chief's report.
Good evening. We'll start with alarms as we normally do, and we're going to cover a period of time from February 20th until yesterday, which would have been March 18th. So since that time, the FD had provided ALS intercept on 13 different incidents. We actually had 13 incident responses to the highway as well, which was a little low for the last month. We had 100 incidents in which an ambulance only responded, and there was no need for FD dispatch. It looks like our alarm numbers at this point are at 1,017 as compared to this time last year. We were at 977, and we continued at about the same of 40 to 45% of overlapping incidents. That's what we have for alarms. Regarding the budget, so we're going to go through period 8, which brings us to the end of February. So through that period of time, last year we were at 68.7%. As we sit here today, we're at 69.2%. So essentially right on target for the budget. Our fire fees through period 8, we are just above $290,000. And for the ALS revenue, ALS billing, we are $71,000. Regarding some of the staffing issues that we're having, we still have the one vacancy with the candidate in the academy right now. He will be graduating sometime in May, end of May, and be on shift shortly thereafter, and that'll be the second shift with 11 firefighters. So until he graduates, there's no savings incurred at all. We had one member on sick leave from January 2nd until just recently. We also had another member who is on sick leave from, again, January 2nd, and we expect him back June of 2024. And we had another member who was injured on duty on February 23rd, and we don't have a return date yet for him. So we're monitoring some of the vacancies, and of course that's attributing to the contractual replacement staffing overtime as well.
And you said February 3rd or 23rd?
23rd. So again, with one shift, only with 11 right now, just keep that in mind. There's going to be some overtime there. The fire marshal's office, you were each provided in your packets with activity for the fire marshal's office. Just nothing particular to point out. 51 total inspections for the month of February. 7 plan reviews. It's typically a slow time for plan reviews. We'll start seeing it pick up about now. 58 permits were approved. 62 different public requests, record requests, and 45 public inquiries. We had 2 investigations as we called out investigators to the scene. We had the fire report for the month of February, a slow month as compared to some other months that we've seen in the past. Nothing otherwise very substantial in your fire marshal's report. Other than that, I have nothing further to report.
Any questions of the chief regarding his report?
Just a couple of quick questions. Budget-wise, this year, we're not paying for the contract to this plowing that happened. We only had a couple of times when we had snow, right? But next year is when they're talking about that coming in to the budget? Or is that coming out of the budget now?
It is not coming out of the budget now. So
So
it would be
right
for
now
next
it's
year.
still in Public Works, right?
Right, it's in central facilities right now.
Oh, central facilities. And do we have any idea how much they spent on that? Because you had to make an estimate, but,
Yeah, because I don't retain a copy of the bills because it's something that gets sent over to finance. I sign saying, yeah, the individual, the company rather, in fact, did provide plowing services or salt, sand services, but we don't retain that. And so, I think I gave during the workshop a pretty good representation of what just one storm costs. And there's been another storm even since then, or two. At $50,000 that we are asking it to go up, I think is a very conservative estimate.
okay,
Because the lawn care alone for 3 of the stations is a standard $10,000-$12,000, somewhere in that neighborhood. I said it that night, that particular workshop, and so whatever it was, I said it was around there. And so that's constant. So that only leaves $40,000 for snow removal and sanding.
so, and they do it for headquarters, they just don't do it for what was considered the volunteer house, even though this isn't a volunteer house anymore.
Yeah, and I don't know why, because they're all town buildings.
Yeah,
So volunteer, not volunteer, they're all town buildings. And this has been the way for a number of years. When I came in, the town was not doing the plowing, and it's been like that for quite some time.
okay,
It's only become an issue now because change in financial leadership wants it to come out of central facilities. What I don't see is I don't see the central facilities number going down to reflect our increase.
okay. I will tell you that a couple of people that I've talked to about it, most residents are shocked that we're paying a contract company to do what Public Works does for every other building.
Well, and I take it a step further. We're on the cemetery list, so we're subcontracting out for cemeteries to get done as well. And with all due respect, a cemetery can wait probably a day or
Right.
two, right, after a storm. It doesn't need to get done right away. At least with the firehouses, I think the argument has been that we need it done. Sometimes when it's snowing, we need it done every hour, hour and a half, right? If it's snowing an inch or two an hour, I understand that's a harder lift, but nonetheless, it needs to get done.
I have had a number of communications from folks about this particular issue as well, and it's not the first time that residents have voiced a concern as to why Public Works cannot provide services for a town building,
Right.
or all of our town buildings, in our case, the volunteer stations as well as headquarters. And again, it's just a matter of finance wanting to take it out of the responsibility of Public Works and put it into our expense. But at the same time, I don't believe our request for that line item has increased. Is that correct?
I don't know. I have not seen a draft of the budget for this fiscal year we're going into.
Okay,
Yeah, that meeting is gonna be tomorrow night about the budget,
got it.
so,
So
I think it's
I haven't
fine.
seen any drafts of it either.
Again, shouldn't be a big concern if the central facilities line is going down, right? Then it's just a
Well,
moving
it's just
around
a
in the
transfer
budget.
from one account to another.
The first presentation I had seen, that wasn't the case.
Okay. Any other questions, Jen?
not right now.
Oh, good. Correspondence.
Other than the regular, normal day-to-day correspondence, I don't have anything that was addressed just to me that I need to share.
We did receive a correspondence regarding the line of duty death from a resident, which was a very extensive response, and I was very much in agreement with the verbiage. So, and I think, Jenna, I think yourself and Pat, I don't know if,
I forwarded it to
Yeah.
the people who weren't on the email,
yeah,
but I don't know whether we should read it, because I mean, it was,
I
mean, I think,
we can read it if you wish, sure.
or even just summarize. I mean,
yeah.
I think that he had a concern about the language regarding legal marriage, and he wants to make sure that the ordinance has things about the common law marriage and how that would work. But then he goes on to speak about supporting the letter that was presented by the Fire Commission at the last Board of Selectmen meeting. He also made some suggestions for additional language that would include even when police officers and firefighters, if they're out and they're off duty and they end up intervening in some manner that could be cause of death.
Which is something that occurs often. So if a firefighter or a police officer, I think what he was referred to, was off duty and they came upon an emergency.
Right, they came
and
yes.
they assisted, did something happen and they were killed, that would be considered in this writer's opinion a line of duty death, which I'm in agreement with a lot of the language that he included there.
The one other thing, there were two other points that he made that I thought were, he talked about that the Board of Selectmen should also consider adding language to the proposed ordinance that would cover deaths of firefighters who were forced into medical requirement due to job exposure to toxins and service-related medical conditions, which I thought was, a good point. And then the last piece that I think he felt that really there should have been a committee put together which showed representation from both departments as they were sort of looking at this language. So hopefully, some of this, it will bring about some changes in the language. So
I think there was one other point that was made in that email, if I remember correctly. They were speaking about firefighters and police officers who were called into duty.
yes,
And as they were coming into duty, either being called in or coming to their regular shift, if there was a accident that caused them to be killed, that would be considered a line of duty death as well. And Chief, correct me if I'm wrong, my understanding is that there's some state legislation that is either pending or on the books currently that addresses that issue?
There's state legislation that was just made its way out of the Public Safety Committee and should be on its way to the floor soon. It defines line of duty and who needs to make that determination. It has nothing to do with this ordinance.
But does it addresses firefighters or police officers that are coming into either the police department or the firehouse on their way coming to duty?
Nope, that legislation was already passed, I believe, 2003, 2004, where there's a bill, if you will, that identifies travel to and from for police and fire only, to and from work, to be considered line of duty and workers' comp eligible. So that's old law.
So it would appear to me, Jen, that based on the writer's request of a committee to look at this verbiage and create verbiage that would be in concert with the state law.
right.
It wouldn't make a lot of sense. Otherwise, we would be creating something that would be in violation of the law, or certainly contrary to the law.
Yeah, I don't know that it would be in violation. I mean, I think a lot of the conversation that was had, and we can get into this when we get, I was thinking we would talk about it under old business a little bit, but it relates to this letter. So the town doesn't have to give a tax abatement, they just can. But if we're going to give the tax abatement, then we should look at, what makes the most sense. We're doing it as a good faith to residents who died in the line of duty, and to have all of these exclusions that say you didn't die in the way that we think you should have would give you the tax abatement. That just takes away from the whole intention of the tax abatement, which is to do something to honor the sacrifice that our first responders make. So,
In my mind, who's going to tell the surviving spouse that no, you're not eligible for
Right,
this? I mean,
exactly.
I mean, who's gonna do that?
Right.
Anyway, and I know that this discussion was tabled at the last Board of Selectmen meeting, and my further understanding is that they were going to take it up at the next meeting in April, I believe. I'm hopeful that they table it once again, and take the advice of our commission as well as this resident to formulate a committee to really delve into the language
Right.
of this. And do we have to have it as broad as it is, or should it be, it's pretty, let's keep it simple.
Yeah. I will say that they did open it up to public comment. Pat was there. Pat made a comment. I read the letter. And then there was quite a bit of support from the people at the meeting to, first of all, one of the comments that multiple people made was this issue of really it should have been a collaboration of the different commissions and departments. And, some people thought the language wasn't quite ready. Thought that travel to and from work should not be excluded from a line of duty death. And that the determination of whether it's line of duty should not necessarily fall to a medical examiner who really is looking at cause of death and not looking at the whole picture. So I think, whether you have other.
Well, after we left, the conversation continued during public comment with two of the individuals who spoke earlier, and they agreed that it should be left up to a non-medical person. The chief, various organizations that understand the complications associated with the firefighter job.
Well, thank you for presenting our letter and representing the commission at that meeting. I think this is a very important issue that the public needs to chime in on.
Yep.
And I'm hopeful that at the next Board of Selectmen meeting, a number of additional residents will come in and voice their opinion, in addition to firefighters and police
Yes.
officers. Obviously, the benefit is for their surviving spouse, and they should have a voice in this.
Right.
As boards and commissioners should. So, but again, thank you for that, and
Yep.
thank you to the resident who submitted that email to us. It was very well done. Any other correspondence received? Hearing none, we'll ask about old business for the department. Chief?
Old business, couple things I wanted to bring up that have been on our agenda in the past, and it's really based on apparatus. So we continue to struggle to maintain a fleet. In fact, the second ladder truck has been out of service now for over a month, awaiting on a part. And despite it being at the authorized dealer to obtain that part, we're still experiencing a backlog and a lot of delivery of parts. And it goes also with the age of our fleet. The truck that's out of service right now is a 2008. And so I don't know when that's going to be back, but to be a month without a truck is a long time. And so I've shared with the commission before a spreadsheet that showed the balance of the fleet that we constantly have to maintain. And I can share that with you every couple of months so you can see, but just know that it's basically a struggle every day. Nothing's going to change anytime soon. We do hope that in May of 2024, we are still anticipating 2 engines to arrive, which should stabilize our fleet. These engines were ordered almost 3 years ago. And so we're hopeful that at that time we can start to stabilize the operations of our fleet. We'll look to see exactly what we're going to downgrade to training or what we're going to get rid of altogether. We'll have to look and see and reevaluate at that time. But just keep in mind that until that time, we continue to incur $3,000 a month to lease an engine. That's coming out of the apparatus repair line. And it's also worth noting, it was in your budget paperwork, that the apparatus repair line right now is at 130%. We're currently almost $50,000 overspent in that line. Now, keep in mind, $3,000 a month towards a lease, is certainly contributing towards that, but we're also spending a lot of money trying to maintain our fleet. Now, you haven't heard me talk too much about it because there's a means to the end, if you will. We have 2 apparatus that are arriving. We have 2 more that, fortunately Mike Frieda has authorized us to order, but they're still, 3 years away. But, we've been talking about this for some time. So the apparatus repair line is high, although I hope that next year it starts to stabilize. That's all I have for old business.
New business of the department. Oh,
Wait, sorry.
Go ahead, yeah.
One question and then a couple of topics I just wanted to follow up on. The ladder truck that's out, so that means we only have one, right? And that's at headquarters? Okay,
There's always a ladder truck in terms of headquarters, always.
Okay.
I mean, assuming we have one available, yeah.
okay. So that was one question, and then just old business topic, something that we talked about a long time ago, the rules and regulations. We had updated the volunteer ones, but we had waited on the rules and regulations because at that point the contract hadn't gone through. But I think that now that it has, maybe if we could come back to that, because there was some language in there that's old and really needs to be cleaned up.
Yep, so I'm currently working on job descriptions at the moment, which I think probably a little more pressing than the rules and regulations, because I don't think there's anything glaring in terms of deficiencies on rules and regs that we need to incorporate. We need to do some updates to some of the ones that are there. But the job descriptions have some glaring deficiencies in them. And so that's my focus at the moment from an administrative standpoint. As soon as we've got that wrapped up, we'll probably move forward to rules and regs.
Okay, because I do remember there was some stuff that we were told really needed to be cleaned up, so.
Just some language.
And, we did last time, when we got to that point, we did like a little committee, so it might be a good idea to just, maybe we can resend out, I think I have them, out to the commission, and then, we can review it and be ready to kind of.
Yeah, they haven't changed since they were provided,
Yeah.
so, something it's on the short order of things.
Yeah.
That'd be good. I think let's wait until these job descriptions get done. Obviously, the contract is now ratified, correct?
It is.
So we can look to go ahead and adjust some of that language.
Okay,
That'd be good. Anything else, Jim?
no, I'm good for right now.
New business of the department.
A new business, I have nothing to share.
The good of the fire department.
Good to the department, I have a couple things. The first is, please keep in mind, April 7th is the fallen firefighter ceremony. We'll be having at headquarters at 1 p.m. Rain or shine, if it's raining, we'll be inside the apparatus bays. I'm hoping for a nice day. The family of our fallen firefighters will be in attendance, and we're trying to keep it relatively small, particularly because it's the first one, and so we don't want to overwhelm ourselves too much. And it's being the first one and a little raw for some people still. We're trying to keep it somewhat, intimate and small. So obviously the commissioners are invited to that, and I encourage you to attend. I had on here the ordinance proposal, which we've already discussed, and the other item I wanted to bring up to the commission's attention under the good of the department is I did have a staff meeting with all the volunteers last week, which I invited you all to, and some of you were able to attend, and I thank you for doing so. Letting the particularly the volunteers of this department know what was planned from a budgetary standpoint in terms of staffing and how it would impact their operations. We're at a crisis right now, as I very clearly identified during the budget workshop. I don't think I could have been any more frank than I was, and trying to make sure that everybody's on the same page and knows that I'm doing the best I can to improve services not only for the citizens but for the volunteers that we ask so much of already. If you go back and you look at the workshop, at that time I discussed how Northeast had responded to had been dispatched to 275 incidents during 2023. And West Ridge had responded to 440 incidents during 2023. Those are busy companies. We're asking a lot of volunteers, and those numbers continue to increase. Northeast has stabilized in terms of their alarms from last year to 2022. West Ridge did take on a number of increased alarms because of the closure of Montauk and the engine that was here that was responding to incidents. Now let it be very well known that there's more incidents occurring than we have apparatus to respond to at times. And that was always the case. And now that we have one less engine here at Montauk, that call volume has shifted to West Ridge. And so what I'm concerned with, and I've shared my concerns with some of the commissioners as well, is we've very candidly discussed the number of volunteers that we currently have. As we sit here today, we are at 16 active volunteers. That doesn't include a couple that are on leave, and that doesn't include 4 probationary members. But 16 is an awful number. When we've talked about this, and I don't want to sound like a broken record here, but keep in mind these companies, all 3 at one time, had 35 active volunteers and had people who still wanted to join. Being down to 16, particularly with Northeast being at only 5 right now, and Northeast is across from Big Y and has an engine and a truck normally when it's in service assigned there. 5 people is not enough to get both those trucks out. You think about even operationally what an apparatus needs to be efficient. It needs really 4. And it normally seats 5 to 6, a lot of our apparatus, which is what we would fill the seats with volunteers for years. What I'm concerned with and what I expressed to the volunteers is that unless and I discussed this during the budget workshop as well, I can remember very specifically that if there was not considerable efforts made to increase staffing, then the burden that we're going to shift onto the volunteers is going to be more now than it ever has been, because they're already responding to almost 700-800 incidents a year. And sometimes headquarters and none of the career staff is able to respond because we're tied up on other alarms. With Northeast at only 5 members, I don't think that it's something that we can continue to dispatch those volunteers to incidents, knowing that with only 5 members and assuming that all 5 are available, which odds are they're not, right? Odds are with any organization, 5 volunteers aren't going to be available at any given time. We did have some discussions during the staff meeting about what it would look like if we combined the 2 companies. It's not the ideal situation, but it would take West Ridge that has roughly a dozen volunteers, and it would add them to, they would basically become one roster. But it's a temporary fix, and when I say temporary, it should be temporary. I don't know how temporary it will be. It's an issue because all we're doing is taking maybe the 2 or 3 volunteers that are available from the west side of town and asking them to respond to the north side of town and respond with an engine or a truck. But now on the west side of town to dispatch, that engine's not going to be able to respond. We're putting more and more responsibility on volunteers that don't have the time to be able to respond to all these incidents. And if we do not make any kind of increase in staffing, I think that the commission and myself need to very much consider combining the companies, because I don't know how we would answer a taxpayer who would say, why are you dispatching an engine and a truck that they're not going to get out most of the time? And if they do, they've got 5 members. When we could certainly look at combining the companies, but again, that's going to create an issue. We're going to go from 16 volunteers to 10 or 12 in the next year, because we asked our volunteers to respond to 25% of incidents. 25% of incidents of 200 something alarms is a lot, but it's manageable. It proves it's manageable, right? We have volunteers. 25% now of 700-800 alarms is a lot more. And so I'm concerned for what's going to happen unless there are some serious considerations for increasing the career staffing, which I've asked for in this budget. I discussed it all in the budget workshop. There's been very, very little conversation, in fact, none from the Board of Finance since that workshop presentation. I don't think that people necessarily realize what we're looking at. What we're looking at is the inability to respond to incidents that are occurring in North Haven because we're shifting more and more incidents on the volunteers to respond to. They're not going to be able to do it all the time. They've proven now they can't do it, and it's not their fault. And the volunteers are asking for help. It was quite obvious, I think, from those that attended the meeting that night that they're not too thrilled with this, and that they're looking for help. They don't want to keep responding to all these incidents, and we asked a lot of them. And so what's going to start to happen as we start moving down this path is, I discussed this during my workshop as well. I discussed redefining the community expectations. And what that means is, if you call 911, there may not be any fire resources responding at all. So we're going to start stacking calls. And what that means is, The calls are gonna stay in queue until we have somebody to send. So I
Right.
just need the commission to be aware of operationally, what's taking place. You know, I read the alarms to you. Not a big increase over last year, but nonetheless, yeah, at least staying the same or more. And you can see the development that's taking place in town, and I don't anticipate this slowing down anytime soon.
So stacking calls versus what we're doing right now. Right now, they assign it, but if volunteers can't get an apparatus out, it's not really stacking it, but no one's responding
It's a
to it.
placeholder until a career unit clears up, and that happens now.
Okay.
And typically, career staff will scramble because that's in our nature. That's what we do. We don't want to see calls go unanswered. We want to see calls answered in an efficient manner that meets national standards. But when we're all up on a highway, you know, one accident and one medical in town, and that's it. That's your entire career staff. We can't, you know, and what I'm trying to make sure is that we don't create scenes that are unsafe because we're trying to respond to another alarm. So we're not going to leave, you know, our brothers on our highway potentially getting hit by a vehicle because we had to clear a unit that could no longer serve as a blocking apparatus because we had to go respond to another incident because it's not being answered.
So stacking does not mean prioritizing.
Not necessarily, no, because particularly with fire calls, there's not a lot of prioritizing that can be done. So what I mean by stacking calls is that there's a good possibility that we will still dispatch the volunteers, but we're looking, if we continue to look at a decline in the volunteers because we shift more and more calls to them, that's what's gonna happen. They're placeholders. I mean, you know, you think about what we did. We fought for the PSA because the ambulance company was assigning ambulances and they weren't responding to town until they freed an ambulance up, right? We fought in court to fix that. We're gonna be doing the same thing now in our fire department.
One other thing when you were talking about getting apparatus out, you mean, I just want to make sure that this is clear, you know, in case people are watching. It's not about the apparatus getting out. It's about getting the people that, the firefighters to be able to, you need a certain number to actually get the
Well, we're not even
apparatus
talking
out.
about that right now. I mean, that's a whole other conversation. We're not even.
It's a staffing issue versus because we've talked about apparatus. I just want to make sure that we're being clear. It's not necessarily the apparatus isn't the reason they can't get out. It's because we don't have the staff to get them out.
Correct.
Right.
Yes,
Okay.
from a volunteer standpoint,
Yes.
yes, and so that's going back to what I said when we had 2 engines that operated here at Monte Luis. We had another engine that we could assign to incidents, and we had volunteers here that would assemble a response, and that's no longer the case.
So now we only have one apparatus that can come out of here because of the staffing issue.
Because there's no volunteers
Right,
here.
okay. I just want to make sure that that's clear to everyone that's not, because we've talked about both things. The fleet is, there's issues with the fleet, but that's not really the substantial issue. It's the issue of you can't get an apparatus out unless there's someone to be on it.
Correct.
If you combine the 2 volunteer companies, they still have to take care of Mondelez also.
No, Monte Luis no longer has any volunteers.
I know, but
To this. I took the Monte Luis engine right offline because we don't have enough volunteers to cover 3 stations. I don't want to do that. We can't do that. I mean, we're, like I said, as it is now with the number of apparatus we have in service at any given time, we run out of apparatus to dispatch. If I take 2 more out of service, I really worry about impacting our ISO rating as a town.
One other thing I'll say is that I've had a conversation with at least one volunteer. You know, there's all this conversation about trying to keep volunteers and retain volunteers and that kind of thing. And I think it's very, you know, they get a message loud and clear when our town keeps saying over and over again, we're not going to invest in the fire department to make sure that there is equipment that will keep us safe and that there's the personnel to be able to respond. So, you know, I think, you know, this issue of, you know, the volunteers, obviously it's not a trend just in North Haven, but I think that in terms of the Board of Finance, they should understand that unless we start really investing in making sure that we're adequately funding the fire department, that you are sending a message to the people who are volunteering and putting their lives on the line. And also for the people who are paid, but, you know,
Yes.
Well, absolutely, and when you look at the call volume, as the chief indicated, going from, 5 to 700 or 800 calls, it's gonna be virtually impossible for them to respond and go to work and,
Right.
and earn their living and stay in good health and have family time. I think there's a general consensus among leadership here in the town that we could only provide the services that we can provide. And I've heard this said a number of times in the past, and even most recently. And if it means that our four apparatus are out on the highway and we have no one to send, that's the best we can do in their mind. In our mind, our fiduciary responsibility as commissioners and certainly the chief and our firefighters want to respond to every single call of help that is being asked upon us. I know there's been some previous discussions about how do we try to entice more people to become volunteers? Do we provide them with tax abatements, for their homes and personal cars, or would that do it? There was discussion about paying volunteer firefighters per call. Would that do it? So, and I think the chief has looked into, and other departments have investigated those incentives, if you will, for volunteers. And chief, again, correct me if I'm wrong, a number of other municipalities have looked at the compensation per call and tax abatements for volunteers, whether it be their personal property, their home or their car. And that has not stimulated additional growth of volunteer firefighters for those municipalities. Is that correct?
Yeah, so we've increased the abatement to the point, to the extent that state law allows us to, so they're getting a max benefit there. Again, assuming that they meet the metrics, right? You have to be an active volunteer and responding to 25% of calls and responding to 50% of drills. You won't be giving the abatement away to people that aren't fulfilling the role of a volunteer. But the abatement is there. We've made enhancements to the volunteer pension. We've done the training grounds increase. We've done a few other things and we've done all that we can for recruitment. We're no different than any other town. I mean, the towns around us are in this very similar situation, and we've talked about this quite extensively before. There's nothing that we're going to come up with that's going to be an immediate fix. We've had years that we saw this coming, years to prepare, and with continued mindset to what you spoke to, and I've heard the same thing. That's fine. People can take on that mindset, and I just want the commission to know, and of course I'm doing my due diligence as the chief to let everybody know that when a call doesn't go answered, and they want to call and find out why there's no truck that responded, or it took half an hour, I'm coming out. I mean, these meetings are recorded for a reason, right? I'm going to point back to these meetings and say this is exactly what we warned about.
Well, I think our discussion here this evening and in the past, speaking to the public directly, is that we're going to do the best we can do with the finances that are allocated from the Board of Finance and approved at the town meeting in the referendum for the fire department. And we can't do any more than what we're allowed to do and have the finances to do, to underwrite the cost of personnel that we need to hire, and also to make sure we have apparatus that would be able to respond. We have sufficient apparatus at this point, and certainly with the two new pieces coming in, but if we don't have the personnel, we're not able to get apparatus out. So I think the public is forewarned. Depending on what is approved in this budget, And I think you heard clearly tonight that we haven't seen a preliminary budget. And I think that, Jen, you mentioned that's going to be presented this week.
I think tomorrow night they'll, Pat, you can probably explain better than I.
It's the third Wednesday, and they will go through suggested cuts, discuss them, and then come up with the budget, the draft that will be presented to the public.
Okay. So, again, I think it's important for the public to voice their opinion as to how they want their public safety to respond on their behalf. So, we take care of moms and dads and grandmas and grandpops and babies here, and certainly homes and businesses. And as the chief indicated in the past, it takes 17 firefighters to fight a simple house fire. And again, you heard earlier, we only have 10 or 11 firefighters on a shift. So we don't have enough firefighters to respond to a simple house fire that are staffed by the North Haven Fire Department. We certainly would need to request mutual aid. But again, is it fair to the municipalities that are loaning firefighters to us when in fact their taxpayers are underwriting the cost of their fire departments? I think if I lived in a neighboring town, I would say, geez, why doesn't your town underwrite the cost of your fire department at least sufficiently in order to fight a single house fire? Now, I believe that those municipalities will come to our assistance in the event of a fire. But the truth of the matter is, it takes them a period of time to get here. And if it's your house on fire, I think the general consensus is you better have homeowners insurance that's going to be able to underwrite the costs of your loss. Because we're going to only be able to do the best we can do.
I mean, I think the other thing that people should really think about is it's the issue of not having a response. If you're in that house, you're trapped in that house, or you have a child trapped in that house, those minutes feel like hours. And it's not just, we're not talking just fires, we're talking about being trapped in cars. I mean, there are so many scenarios in which you need a fast response.
Mhm.
And I personally think it's frightening that our town is putting priorities in other places when we know this is a reality of the fact that our fire department may not be able to respond because we have put our priorities in other places and put public safety second. And I think that's really, what it's going to come down to when the Board of Finance makes a decision. They're going to have to decide what's more important when they're looking. What is the most important thing? I personally think it should be making sure that we're all safe, and that doesn't seem to be where they're at. But
There are residents that consider those of us that are part of this commission and the chief as a fear mongering. You're putting fear in the residents' minds. I think what we're putting in the residents' mind are the realities of what we can and cannot do. You can only do the best you can do with the personnel that you have and with the apparatus that you have. Once those resources are spent and not available, we have no other resource to fall back upon. So that is the reality of what we're speaking about tonight. It's not fear mongering. It's the reality of what we can or cannot do. And again, I'm going to repeat, there are people in town that really believe that we could only do the best that we can do, and if that's not good enough, oh well. It's up to the resident to fend for themselves, or their homeowners or their auto insurance to take care of whatever the damage is or the loss, and we can only do what we can do. So, Chief, thank you for being very transparent and very clear as to what our capabilities are and what the stress is with only 17 or 16 volunteers that we have to supplement our paid staff. In the past, it was in reverse. Our paid staff supplemented the volunteers when we had 130 or 120 volunteers. Obviously, that's no longer the case, and our town no longer is the town that it was not even 5-10 years ago. When you look at all of the economic development and you look at the apartment houses that have been built on Washington Avenue and around the town, and their high-rise buildings, there's significant risk that's out there that can cause some major issues in the event of an emergency in any one of those structures. So the public needs to speak up during the town meeting and the Board of Finance meetings to voice their opinion as to what they believe public safety should provide. Anything else, Chief, on that
Nope,
issue?
that's it.
Public comments, I see there's no one here for public comments. I'll entertain a motion to move into executive session. Do I hear a second?
Second.
All in favor? So moved. I'd like to reconvene the Tuesday, March 19, 2024 North Haven Fire Commission meeting to order. We'll entertain a motion to adjourn this meeting.
So,
Second.
Good idea, Pat.
There you go.
Four.
All in favor?
All in favor, aye.
Aye.
This meeting's adjourned. Thank you very much. I appreciate it.
The preceding program is brought to you in part through a grant from the town of North Haven. Watch town meetings or other videos on demand at nhtv.com.